1948, a small German town in the American zone of occupation. The train station had a new sign with the same old name. David Rosenberg, 34 years old, stepped down from the carriage with a single suitcase and an American passport. He paused, listening for a sound he knew would not come. No one shouted his childhood nickname from the platform. No one waved from behind the barrier. He was, officially, a returning German national of Jewish origin. Unofficially, he was a ghost, walking back into the place that had buried his family without graves. He opened a worn notebook and wrote on the first clean page since 1942. The street looks the same. The people look the same. Only the missing greet me louder than the living. He had come to reclaim his parents' shop. He had not yet understood that the shop was the least complicated thing he was trying to reclaim. Before 1933, normal life with an expiry date no one saw. David had grown up in this town, population 12,000, one synagogue, about 80 Jewish residents. His parents ran a modest textile shop on the main street, work shirts, bed linens, fabric by the meter. They sold on credit. They knew customers by name, the butcher's wife who bargained too long, the school teacher who always paid on time. In the early 1930s, his childhood diaries mentioned football games in the field, trips to the nearby river, annoyance at Latin homework. The word Jew appeared mostly in religious context, not as accusation. Then came 1933. Hitler's face appeared in newspapers. Brown uniforms appeared in the streets. At first, the changes were new flags on official buildings, new slogans, boycott signs on April 1st, 1933, "Don't buy from Jews." His father laughed bitterly, saying, "Next week they'll need shirts again." Propaganda doesn't sew buttons. He underestimated how long propaganda could last. Step-by-step exclusion, laws as slow strangulation. Between 1933 and 1938, David's world shrank not with one blow, but with dozens of small cuts. Jewish children placed at the back of the classroom. Teachers regretfully asking him not to answer questions. The local football club reluctantly asking him not to come to practice. The shop suffered. Uniformed SA men stood outside on boycott days. Old customers crossed the street, suddenly fascinated by other shop windows. In 1935, the Jair Nuremberg laws redefined him legally. A citizen turned subject. A neighbor turned non-Aryan. His Christian classmates repeated phrases they had learned. Mixed marriages are against the law. Jews are not really German. The municipal council discussed Aryanization, the forced transfer of Jewish businesses to German hands, valuations of property for the sake of fairness. Behind closed doors whispered excitement at bargains. By 1938, the Rosenberg shop was targeted. An Aryan buyer, a local shopkeeper who had been a customer for years, expressed interest. Official documents would later record voluntary transfer under mutually agreed conditions. David watched as men in uniform stood behind the buyer's chair during negotiations. Kristallnacht and the End of Illusions. November 19, 1938. The synagogue burned. Not completely, stone doesn't burn, but the interior was gutted, windows smashed, Torah scrolls torn. In the morning, townspeople walked past. Some shook their heads in feigned sadness. Some smirked. Many quickened their steps. The Rosenberg's shop windows were broken. Merchandise spilled onto the street. Police reports filed afterward spoke of excesses by unknown persons. Everyone in town knew the names of the unknown. The next week, the bank informed his father. Credit frozen. Mortgages to be re-evaluated. Under pressure, with no access to funds, He signed the shop over to the Aryan buyer at a fraction of its value. Officially, a legal sale. In reality, a legal sale. In reality, extortion under the cover of law. At home, his father said, "This is not our country anymore. We must leave." Leaving was not simple. Quotas, visas, money restrictions. In 1940, after months of paperwork and appeals from relatives abroad, a single U.S. immigration visa arrived. It was for a one-y person. They decided David would go, study, make a new life. "We'll follow later," his mother said. They did not. America, safety with survivor's guilt pre-installed. New York, 1941. David arrived with a suitcase, $10, $10, an accent that marked him as foreign. He found work, stock boy in a textile warehouse, night school learning English. Letters from home slowed, then stopped. The last one, dated early 1942, mentioned deportation orders for the remaining Jews in the district, rumors of resettlement in the east. No one wrote, "We are being sent to die." No one knew precisely yet. He tried to bring his parents over, but quotas, war, bureaucracy. By the time the truth about extermination camps surfaced, their names were already on lists compiled by others. In 1945, the war ended. He held a newspaper with photos from Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. He searched every frame. He did not find his parents' faces. Absence was not proof of survival, it was proof of nothing. 1945 to 1947, a Germany without Jews, and a Jew without Germany. In America, David became a naturalized citizen, an employee at a larger textile business. He married a Jewish refugee from Vienna. They spoke German at home, English at work, Yiddish with older relatives. Germany lived in their sentences as a place of childhood memories, betrayal, murder. He assumed he would never go back. Then, in late 1947, a cousin who had survived Theresienstadt and returned to Germany wrote from the ruins, "There is a property list here. Your parents' shop is on it. They say former Jewish property to be restituted. Their names are crossed out. Yours is not. If you do not come, the town will forget you ever existed." The words stung. He had spent years trying to forget the town. Now the prospect of being forgotten by it felt like a second erasure. He decided to go, not to forgive, not to reconcile, to see. 1948, the walk from the station. When he arrived back in town, the station master did a double take. "Rosenberg, is that you?" He nodded. The man's face shifted through surprise, guilt, a forced smile. "You survived. We all thought, well, good you made it." The phrase, "good you made it," the phrase, "good you made it," hung between them like a bad joke. He walked down the familiar street, the bakery still there, the butchers still in business, the church spire unchanged. What was missing? The small Star of David on the synagogue's facade, the few Jewish names on mailboxes. His parents' shop now bore a different name, Textilwaren Muller. The window display was similar. Shirts, sheets, rolls of fabric. Inside, behind the counter, stood the man who had bought it in 1938. For a moment neither spoke. Then the man said, "David, my God, we heard you went to America. You look, well." In his notebook later that evening, David wrote, "I stepped into my parents' shop and was welcomed as a guest. Restitution. Law meets selective memory. Post-war Allied directives and German laws required restitution of property taken under Nazi persecution. Compensation where restitution was impossible. On paper, the process was rigorous. In practice, it depended on surviving documentation, local officials' willingness, the current holder's attitude. The current holder's attitude. In the town's restitution office, A young bureaucrat in a too large suit pulled out files stamped Wiedergutmachung, making good again. The word itself was audacious. What was done to you, Herr Rosenberg, can never truly be made good, he said, rehearsed empathy in his tone. But the law provides mechanisms. He listed options. Return of the shop. Financial settlement. Combination thereof. Financial settlement. Combination thereof. The current owner, Muller, had already filed a statement. He had paid fair value in 1938. He had invested in the business. He employed local workers. He had nothing to do with politics. He expressed willingness to reach an amicable arrangement. Translated, he did not want to give up the shop. He was open to some financial compromise to keep what he had taken cheaply. The mathematics of dispossession were about to be rewritten in legal language. The negotiations, courtesy over a crime scene. They arranged a meeting. David, Muller, a restitution officer. In the office, not in the shop. The conversation began with condolences for his parents' fate, remarks about the terrible times. Muller insisted, I never wanted you gone, David. You know how things were. Pressure from above. Pressure from above. Pressure from above. SA men everywhere. I had to take the offer or face consequences. The restitution officer, pen ready, translated emotional claims into bureaucratic phrases, acted under duress. No ideological motivation. David listened. He remembered Muller standing behind uniformed men as the contract was signed. His father's trembling hand. He had no documentary proof of threats, only memory. Legally, the file contained a contract with signatures, a purchase price. Law is comfortable with paper. Less so with what people do in rooms without stenographers. In the end, the file would record. Settlement reached. Partial financial compensation. Co-ownership with right of use granted to claimant. In plain language, Muller kept the shop. David got money and a share on paper. He walked past the window every day knowing his name was on the deed but not on the sign. Everyday encounters, the choreography of avoidance. In a town where everyone knew everyone, his presence forced people into choices. Greet him. Ignore him. Overcompensate. The former classmate who had once called him Dirty Jew now crossed the street when he approached. The butcher, who had stopped delivering to his parents in 1935, now insisted, First coffee is on the house. We all suffered in the war, you know. Suffering was a new currency. Everyone spent it to buy moral equivalents. He heard phrases repeated like liturgy. We knew nothing. We only followed orders. We were afraid. No one said, I was glad when your shop went cheap. I enjoyed the promotion when the Jewish colleague was dismissed. In his notebook, he began listing categories of silence. 1. Those who lied to others. 2. Those who lied to others. 2. Those who lied to themselves. 3. Those who lied to themselves. 3. Those who said nothing and hoped he would litterdeem. The invisible cemetery, mourning without graves. The Jewish cemetery on the edge of town had survived the war. Some stones toppled. Some inscriptions defaced. No bulldozers had cleared it. It was too far from new building plans. He walked among the graves, searching for his grandparents' stones. His parents. They were not there. Their names existed only on deportation lists. The cemetery now belonged administratively to a regional Jewish community comprised mostly of survivors and DPs, displaced persons, who lived in larger cities. Once a year, a rabbi came by. The rest of the time, the cemetery was overgrown, visited mostly by curious children on dares. Standing among the stones, he realized, here, the dead have more names than the living. The town's Jewish population in 1948, fewer than 10. Most were returnees like him. survivors passing through on their way elsewhere. The community could not be rebuilt in a place where memory felt like a trap. Denazification on paper, continuity in practice. Officially, the American Zone had conducted denazification, questionnaires, hearings, categories from major offender to exonerated. In his town, the outcomes looked like this. The former mayor classified as Mitläufer, follower. The police chief received as Mitläufer, follower. The police chief received a fine and returned to administrative work. The teacher who had humiliated him in class retired on pension. Posters proclaimed, "Nazis removed from office." He saw familiar faces at desks in town hall, police station, tax office. The men who had enforced anti-Jewish measures now signed restitution documents with a new stamp. They spoke of restoring justice. He thought, the same hands that took now officially give back. The process looked like accountability from a distance. Up close, it looked like continuity with a new letterhead. The refugee perspective, competition of victims. In 1948, his town hosted hundreds of German expellees from Silesia, East Prussia, and the Sudetenland, families crammed into school halls. New barracks at the edge of town. They had lost homes, farms, possessions in the east. They arrived with their own trauma. Some resented that scarce housing and compensation funds went to Jews back from America instead of to German families who had suffered too. At the ration office, a woman in a threadbare coat hissed quietly when he stepped out. "Of course he gets help. They always land on their feet. We lost everything too." The rhetoric of envy had survived the Reich and adapted to the new context. Authorities worried about social tension, international image. They tried to balance restitution to Jewish claimants, support for German refugees. The competition of victimhood played out not in speeches, but in queues for coal and housing. The distance between law and justice. By 1950, his restitution case was settled, according to court records, compensation paid in installments. Legal ownership clarified. West German politicians pointed to such cases as proof of Wiedergutmachungspolitik, policy of making amends. From a legal standpoint, boxes ticked, files closed. From his standpoint, no one had been held criminally accountable for expropriations. No one in town had been prosecuted for denunciations that led to deportations. He received periodic payments from a state that inherited obligations from the Reich it claimed to have rejected. He once joked bitterly to a friend, "I am being paid by the successor of the thieves to prove they are no longer thieves." The friend did not laugh. It sounded too close to the truth to be funny. Staying or leaving, the arithmetic of belonging. Others who had returned made different calculations. A widow from the next town came back, stayed 6 months, and emigrated to Israel. A former businessman reopened his shop, then sold it, and moved to Frankfurt, where there was a larger Jewish community. David's American wife, when she finally visited, walked the town's streets and said, "It's like a stage where they change the scenery but not the cast." He contemplated 3 options. 1. Sell his share in the shop, cut ties, return to America. 2. Fight for full control, live in a place that had once cheered his exclusion. 3. Keep a legal foothold while living mostly elsewhere. He chose the third. He spent most of the year in New York, where he built a modest import business. He returned to the town once or twice a year, for legal matters, for rituals he could not quite name. Each visit felt like inspecting a scar, confrontations that never quite happened. He rehearsed speeches in his head. To Müller, "You profited from my family's persecution. Admit it." To the former teacher, "You humiliated a child because you could." To the pastor who had preached about obedience, You found your voice only after the war. In reality, the conversations went. Polite greetings. Weather. Vague references to difficult times. On one visit, Muller said, "You know, David, I always opposed what they did to you people." He replied, "Yet you signed every form." Muller's eyes hardened. "We all did what we had to do to survive." The moral calculus in town had one constant: survival justified collaboration. Collaboration never quite justified apology. Second generation. Children asking questions their parents avoided. By the 1960s, the town's teenagers read magazine articles about Auschwitz trials, school textbooks that, cautiously, mentioned deportations. Some of them approached him when he visited. "Herr Rosenberg, my grandfather says the Jews were taken away, but no one knew where." "Is that true?" he answered. "By 1942, you did not need to know where the trains went. You only needed to watch that they did not come back." One girl, whose father sat on the town council, asked, "Did my father do something to your family?" He could have pointed to signatures. He chose not to. "Ask him what he saw," he said. The real reckoning in post-war Germany would not happen in courtrooms or restitution offices. It would happen, slowly, across kitchen tables where children asked their parents what they had done. The last visit, choosing what to remember. In the early 1970s, the synagogue, empty for decades, was finally turned into a community center. With a small plaque, "Former synagogue of our Jewish fellow citizens," destroyed in 1938, renovated 1972. The plaque did not say who destroyed it. Passive voice had become the town's favorite tense. At the modest unveiling ceremony, the mayor spoke of a dark chapter, our Jewish heritage. He did not mention names of deported. David, standing in the small crowd, realized the town had found a way to commemorate without accusing itself. On his last walk down the main street, he stopped in front of the shop. The sign still said, "Textilware and Muller." Legally, he still owned a share. Emotionally, he owned only the absence. In his notebook on the final page, he wrote, "I came back to reclaim a shop and found instead a museum of omissions. Restitution gave me money. It did not give me parents, neighbors, a minyan." Home is not where they return your property. It is where they remember you without being asked. He sold his share, donated part of the money to a Jewish old-age home in another city, and stopped visiting. What his story says about life after the war. The story of the Jewish returnee who came back to his German hometown is not a story of dramatic confrontations or neat reconciliation. It is a story of how property could be returned, while relationships remained broken. How a society could rebuild houses faster than it rebuilt trust. How law could close files while memory kept them open. In 1948, when he wrote, "The street looks the same. The people look the same. Only the missing greet me louder than the living," he captured the central paradox of post-war Germany for those who had been its targets. The physical landscape of home survived. The moral landscape had collapsed and was rebuilt in ways that often left the victims standing at the edge, watching. For many Jewish survivors, coming back was not a return. It was an inspection of ruins others preferred not to see.